We are here with Margaret Walsh of Secret Garden Educational Pathways, which we'll explain what that means later. But she's going to share how she does special education from a Thomistic lens, which I think is really amazing. So, Margaret, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. This is very exciting.
Yes, yes. So, when I was watching your stuff, one of your success stories was something I'd love for you to share. Would you mind going through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a girl who came to us who had struggles with memory. Like she would read her school at the beginning of the week, she wouldn't remember anything. 2 days later, she had a hard time just focusing in class. A lot of different things that kind of built up for her to, struggle with school. In the end, she had learning struggles, what we would consider a learning disability. But when I worked her through certain things to help her build up her comprehension and her memory, she did really, really well. And at a certain point, you could see that the door was opening and things were starting to click, which was amazing to see in the class. But then, probably a month after I finished working with her, maybe 2 months, I was just checking with her mom, and her mom said, "Hey, guess what she's doing now? She's reading encyclicals," which I'm sure all of you guys know what encyclicals are, but I was like, wow, we had started off at like square one where we were reading Aesop's fables and discussing those and kind of dipping into saint stories and just building up again her comprehension and her memory so that she could tackle these subjects. And she went from square one all the way up to encyclicals, which was, it blew my mind. But
Yes.
she was a really amazing student to work with. And we've had a couple other success stories as well where students have started off with a lot of deficits, and then they've been able to strengthen the parts of their mind that they need to in order to overcome those deficits, or at least improve them a lot so that they can do a lot more in their learning, which is just, it's phenomenal to see their journey and that moment when the door opens and it clicks and you're like, they've made it.
Yes,
So really
that is
amazing.
exciting. That is great. And I love how, what you're going to share with us now is, how we think. And I'm going
Yeah.
to pull up a little image here because when you were walking through this, I was like, man, this is awesome. I hear like Father Ripperger talking about this, but to
Yeah.
hear, someone in education talking about this is a really amazing thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. So working in special education has given me certain insight into how we think. And it's based on Aristotle and St. Thomas. But when you're working in special education, there's like this hyper focus on the thought process itself, because any of the remediation techniques that are helpful and are good are based off of the thought process, which is something that I saw. I went to Thomas Aquinas College where I learned a lot about the philosophical thought process that sounds purely theoretical. But then when I was being trained in very specialized techniques, I was like, oh, this is what Aristotle was talking about. This is what St. Thomas was talking about. And putting those two together really helped me see the thought process. So when you're looking at the thought process, you have several divisions. You have the senses and the appetites. And then when you process the information, I'll just go through a very brief diagram of this. You receive information through your senses. So when you're learning, it's usually you hear information or you see it, you read it. And then your mind has to create an image of this with the imagination, goes through the common sense. And then your mind creates that image of the information. Then that image is kind of run through the cogitative power, which refines the image and figures out what's important, what's not important. Um, and it compares it to old experiences and old memories as well. So there's a whole link in that middle section of the diagram with the processing that's needed to clarify the information before you reach the final step, which is the information is sent to the soul. The intellect is seated in the soul. So you have the your body, your senses interacting with your brain, which does a lot of that processing that I just mentioned. And then once you have that information processed in your brain, then it gets sent to your intellect, which is in your soul. And that's the first part where you have understanding, and then you can act upon that understanding, which goes back through all those pathways again. So when you're working with a student who has special education learning needs, you see that in like hyper focus, because any of the parts that they're struggling in are going to be between the senses in the brain or within the processing of the brain itself. And then once that information gets to the soul, the reason why it might be incomplete or the student doesn't understand things or they can't remember things is because not all of the information got to the soul. And that's because the problems happened in the senses or the brain, which again, you can see with the diagram that the process, everything that might go wrong happens beneath, you get beneath the part of the intellect. So it's really interesting. So for example, it's easier to see examples. If a student is struggling with comprehension, they're usually struggling with making the visual of the information. So if you're reading about a dog, they might not be picturing a dog at all. They might be thinking about something else or just have a blank slate that doesn't see a dog. For someone with dyslexia, they struggle with forming the correct sequencing of letters mentally, kind of like mental math. But again, it has to do with that imagination forming the visuals in their mind for the rest of the processing. For other students, they just have slow processing, which means they can't process information very quickly. So if you stimulate that and with certain exercises, they will be able to strengthen that kind of like a muscle so that they are able to process faster. So again, it's really amazing to see because when you're working with the body, you're able to make progress with it. And you see with this with people who have had traumatic injuries, there's a lot of therapy that goes into helping them increase their capabilities. And it's very similar with students who have learning struggles. If you help them support their body and their brain functions, they will make progress, which is, again, really amazing to see because you saw this in hyper focused that you don't see with most other people. I mean, the thought process is goes so quickly, I should say. But when you're working with these students, you see so much that you didn't see before.
So that basically leads us into what Secret Garden Educational Pathways does, which takes all this theory we talked about and applied. You gave us a few examples. Could you go a little more into what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Secret Garden, we work with students to help them increase their learning potential. Oftentimes, when you have a student with special education learning needs, most schools will say, okay, well, we'll modify the curriculum so that your student can at least kind of get through it. But what we're doing is we're trying to figure out what is causing the learning struggle. Is it slow processing? Is it dyslexia struggles? Is it dysgraphia? Is it verbal expression? All these different terms that I'm using. But we try to figure out what the main area of struggle is for the student. And then we use a combination of a cognitive therapy and then specific remediation for that student. So that's targeting their specific weakness. And that can be a variety of different things. Usually students fall into 3 or 4 categories, though. Usually there are reading problems that I call like reading mechanics that they struggle with. And that's where we focus on helping them build the visuals for the sequencing of the letters and connecting with sight word recognition, things like that. Another area that students typically kind of fall into is comprehension and memory. So that doesn't even really have a diagnosis or a label. There are a lot of students who have a diagnosis that struggle in this area, but this is kind of like a general area. And you're building up the conceptual imagery and then the memory retrieval and helping them really tap into that and start using that again. Another area is math, which is like a whole combination of things. So that's fun. We use a lot of games in math. We use a lot of games in all these different things. And then another area is just the processing speed. But there are also other things to look at as well that we take into consideration, like movement therapy, which we don't do ourselves. But occupational therapy is something that we will sometimes suggest. Nutritional therapy is something that we will suggest, and we were started to work with a nutritional therapist, therapy counselor here. So that's something where you're supporting the whole body, which a lot of families don't recognize.
Yeah, I love that, Margaret, because we're a body soul composite, right?
Yeah.
So we can't think that it's all what we do with our mind.
Yeah.
Intake is so huge. Like you think about exercise,
Yeah.
and the part that's way harder than exercise is diet. And so surely this applies on that realm as well. Now, I want to ask, because the audience may be wondering, are you Catholic?
Yes, if you hadn't guessed already, I'm Catholic.
Yes. So that's because I know
Yeah.
so many Catholics that
Yeah.
their child struggles with dyslexia or something like that, and they would be happy to learn from someone they can trust. And we had a great conversation before we went live. So Margaret is a very orthodox woman. So I'm very grateful to be sharing this. Were you going to say something there?
Yeah, no, I was gonna say it's been amazing working with a lot of Catholic families. That's one of the reasons why I started this, was because I was homeschooled myself. I didn't have any learning struggles, but I knew that the homeschool community, and especially the Catholic homeschool community, didn't really have any support in this area. And I knew that, once had a family, I wouldn't want to send my kids to just anyone. I would want
Mm,
to find someone who I could trust. And a lot of the content that we use, the materials that we use, are at least associated with Catholicism. So we will use saint stories every so often, and we will do Book of Virtue stories, things like that, and provide an opportunity for students to explore their faith with someone else if they want to. And just kind of like getting the soil ready. One of our priests was talking about that recently, is like preparing your soul, preparing the soil to receive grace. And you don't have to necessarily like go real hardcore with any of the Catholic materials, but to just help the students kind of prepare the soil by preparing their minds to receive the word of God and to be receptive to the grace. Obviously, God can reach anyone's soul regardless of what capabilities they
mhm.
have, but the more you can prepare yourself for that, the better, which is something that is really important to me. So yeah, it's been amazing working with all these kids. It's been very edifying for me. Some of these kids are, the stuff martyrs are made of, and I'm sitting there like, wow, I should have greater faith myself.
Yes, and
So
I
it's
love
been
that we all
great.
have different crosses that we carry. And I think that I'm sure there
Yep.
have been so many parents out there that are like, "Wow, how is this my cross?" And it's
Yeah.
amazing to share this with others to hope that they can be introduced to ways that can help you know educate their children, and in that way both of them are growing, and obviously intellectually, but that has such a connection to the spiritual, because I'm sure you've encountered so many people that lose maybe not lose faith, but they lose confidence in so many other things because of the difficulties that they face in that realm.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to understand that when a student has a learning struggle, I mean, some of the learning struggles are very severe, and that can
Mm,
be very disheartening. But to me, it's hopeful because when you're talking about the body soul composite, there are changes that you can make in the body and the mind. But ultimately, God can come down and touch that soul
mm,
anytime. And we have no idea what the spiritual state of some of these individuals are when their struggles are so severe. I'm sure there are many saints that we don't know of that
mm.
had struggles like this. I mean, St.
Wow.
Joseph of Cupertino is an example, a clear example of someone who would have had a learning disability if he had been diagnosed back in the day. And yet he reached such a high level of sanctity. So that's something for parents to keep in mind if their student has a very severe struggle. And then for other students whose struggles are not as severe, um, there's a lot of room for change because we are body soul composite and the body can change. Um, we can assist the body in helping it grow stronger in certain areas. So it's just been really amazing to approach it from a Catholic perspective because it brings such depth to to the table, I guess is how you could say it, because oftentimes it's such a one-dimensional thing when you're working in special education, but when you
Yes.
have the richness of the faith to to guide you, it's so much better.
Oh yeah.
So
No, I mean, all I've heard in relation to special education or dyslexia is like, well, they just have to, work on the IEP or something like that. It's very
yep,
secular. So to
yep.
see a Catholic perspective on that is really great. So I applaud the work that you're doing. Now,
Thank
Margaret,
you.
where can people find more about you?
They can find me at Secret Garden Educational Pathways. So if you type it into Google, you should be able to find it. But if you want to look for the website, it's www.secretgardenep.com. So I abbreviated the last two words. And there's a website. There are a couple little videos on there, and there's a question and answer page about how we work with families and things like that. But if any families just have questions, feel free to reach out to us because happy to help families in any way I can. And if we don't have an answer, then we're going to try to get an answer for you, or at least refer you to someone else, someone who can help. Because again, trying to give the students as much support as they can so that they can lead really fulfilling lives is really important. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you for following that really as a vocation, and I'm sure bringing so much joy and hope to people. So we thank
Yeah,
God, of course, for the graces that He provides. But it's
yeah,
amazing to think that even in every area, every everything, is we can offer up to Christ and we can glorify Him through that. So it's cool to see
yeah.
something so secular as education can be, I guess, sanctified. So
Yeah. Well,
thank
it
you,
shouldn't be
Margaret.
secular, but yes,
Yes.
it's true. It is now, and it's been truly amazing to follow this journey because it hasn't been of my choosing. It's just God was like, okay, this is what you're gonna do. I was like, okay, here we go.
Yes.
So He's been leading me every step of the way, and it's been amazing to see what His plans have done. So
Amen.
yeah,
Awesome. Well, Margaret, thank you so much for your time.
thank
Hope you
you.
enjoyed this video. Please like and share it. Have a blessed day, and God love you.